Imagine holding a secret so profound, so devastatingly powerful, that it threatens to shatter the very foundation of the universe as humanity understands it. Now, imagine holding that secret inside your chest for 30 long, agonizing years. On May 24th, 1543, in a cold room in Frombork, Poland, an old man lay dying. His breath was shallow, his eyes dimming. But in his final moments, his trembling hands reached out to touch the freshly printed pages of a book he had spent his entire life hiding. This was not just a scientific text, it was a confession. This is the story of Nicolaus Copernicus and the terrifying silence that defined his life. To understand his fear, we must first understand his world. For over 1,000 years, civilization was anchored by a single, unshakable truth. The Earth was the center of all things. It was heavy, static, and immovable, the stage upon which the drama of God's creation unfolded. The sun, the moon, and the stars were merely celestial decorations spinning dutifully around us. To question this was not just scientific error, it was to question common sense, sensory experience, and the Holy Scripture itself. It was a comfortable prison of ignorance, and Copernicus was about to find the key.
History often paints Copernicus as a rebel, afraid of the church, afraid of being branded a heretic. While that danger was real, his true paralyzing fear was far more personal and insidious. He was a perfectionist of the highest order. He wasn't just afraid of the stake, he was terrified of ridicule. He feared the laughter of mathematicians more than the judgment of priests. He looked at his own calculations and saw flaws, inconsistencies, and ugliness where there should have been divine harmony. He was a man trapped by his own need for absolute certainty in a world of chaos.
Born Mikołaj Kopernik in the bustling merchant city of Torun, he was never meant to be a revolutionary. The son of a wealthy merchant, his life was charted for stability, not scandal. Orphaned at a young age, he was taken in by his powerful uncle, a bishop who guided him toward the safety and prestige of the church. Young Nicolaus was quiet, observant, and fiercely intelligent. He walked the cobblestone streets of Torun, looking up at the sky, unaware that the stars he admired were waiting to betray everything he was being taught in school.
Sent to Italy for his education, Copernicus drank deeply from the cup of the Renaissance. In Bologna and Padua, the air was thick with the dust of ancient manuscripts and the thrill of new ideas. Here, he studied not just canon law and medicine, but astronomy. He worked alongside the astronomer Domenico Maria Novara, daring to criticize the ancient texts of Ptolemy. It was in the warm Italian nights that the seed of doubt was planted. He began to realize that the ancient maps of the sky were clumsy, like a puzzle forced together by a child. The prevailing system of the time, created by Ptolemy, was a mathematical nightmare. To make the Earth the center of the universe, astronomers had to invent epicycles, circles within circles, to explain why planets sometimes appeared to move backward. It was a messy, convoluted machine. To Copernicus, who believed that God was the ultimate geometer, this mess was an insult. He believed the Creator would not build such a clumsy universe. His aesthetic sense, his desire for beauty and simplicity, drove him to look for a better arrangement.
Then the thought struck him, a simple, elegant, yet terrifying shift. What if we stop the sun and move the Earth? Suddenly, the chaos vanished. The weird backward loops of Mars and Jupiter were explained not by complex circles, but by the simple fact that Earth was overtaking them on an inner track. It was beautiful. It was simple. It was mathematically superior. But as the euphoria of discovery faded, a cold dread settled in his stomach. To say this out loud was to claim that humanity was not the center of God's attention. It was to turn the world upside down.
Around 1514, he wrote a brief sketch of his theory, known as the Commentariolus, or Little Commentary. He didn't publish it. He didn't print it. He hand-copied it and whispered it into the hands of a few trusted friends. It was a test balloon sent up into the hostile atmosphere of European academia. He waited for the reaction, flinching at every shadow. This was the behavior of a man deeply insecure about his own genius. He wanted validation, but he was too terrified to stand on the public stage and claim his discovery.
We must remember that in the 16th century, a moving Earth sounded physically impossible. If the Earth spun, why didn't the birds get left behind? Why didn't buildings crumble from the constant wind? Why didn't we all fly off into space? Copernicus didn't have the physics of gravity or inertia to explain these things yet. He had the math of the heavens, but the physics of the Earth contradicted him. He knew that if he published, the common-sense philosophers would tear him apart. He would be the laughingstock of Europe.
So he buried himself in work. Contrary to the image of the isolated hermit, Copernicus was a busy man of the world. He was a canon of the cathedral chapter in Warmia. He was a diplomat, a physician, and an economist. He even formulated a principle of money that predated Gresham's law. He managed lands, organized defenses against invading knights, and treated the sick. Every administrative duty was a convenient excuse to delay the great work. I am too busy, he could tell himself, to rewrite the universe today.
But the stars would not leave him alone. In the cold, remote town of Frombork, he built an observation platform on a tower. Without a telescope, which wouldn't be invented for another 60 years, he used wooden instruments to measure the positions of planets with the naked eye. Night after freezing night, suffering from the damp cold of the Baltic coast, he collected data. He was desperate to make his tables perfect, to find the proof that would make his theory undeniable. But the more he measured, the more complications arose. As years turned into decades, the world became a more dangerous place.
the Protestant Reformation exploded in 1517, Europe was torn apart by religious war. Intellectuals were under scrutiny like never before. Martin Luther himself reportedly mocked Copernicus, calling him the fool who wants to turn the whole art of astronomy upside down. The atmosphere was charged with intolerance. Publishing a book that contradicted the literal interpretation of Joshua stopping the sun was no longer just an academic risk. It was walking into a minefield.
For 30 years, the manuscript of De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium lay in his study, growing in bulk but hidden from the public eye. He revised it, checked it, and revised it again. He followed the advice of the ancient poet Horace, who said a work should be kept for 9 years before publishing. Copernicus tripled that. He became the guardian of a truth he was too afraid to share, resigning himself to the idea that his life's work might die with him, unseen and unread.
Then, in 1539, a miracle arrived in the form of a young man. George Joachim Rheticus, a brilliant 25-year-old mathematics professor from Wittenberg, risked traveling into Catholic territory to meet the legendary astronomer. He was a Protestant, Copernicus was a Catholic, and legally they should have been enemies. But Rheticus was captivated by the rumors of the new theory. He forced his way into Copernicus's solitary life, bringing with him the energy and optimism that the old man had lost long ago.
Rheticus became the catalyst. He studied the manuscript and was awestruck. He couldn't understand why Copernicus was hiding this masterpiece. For 2 years, the young Protestant badgered, cajoled, and encouraged the old Catholic. He argued that the truth belonged to mankind, not to a locked chest. Slowly, the ice around Copernicus's heart began to melt. He realized that perhaps he wasn't alone. With Rheticus's help, he finally agreed to test the waters one last time.
In 1540, Rheticus published the Narratio Prima, a first report summarizing Copernicus's theory. They held their breath, waiting for the backlash, waiting for the Inquisition, for the mockery, for the condemnation. But the sky didn't fall. The reaction was mixed, certainly, but there was interest. Curiosities were piqued. The silence from the church was interpreted as tacit permission. Emboldened by this lack of disaster, Copernicus finally, reluctantly, handed over his life's work to be printed.
But the fear never truly left him. In his dedication to Pope Paul III, written as a preface to the book, Copernicus played his final defensive card. He framed his work not as a challenge to Scripture, but as a solution to the calendar problems that plagued the Church. He wrote with humble defiance, saying that mathematics is written for mathematicians, implying that only those who understood the complex geometry had the right to judge him. It was a shield constructed of intellect and piety.
While the book was being printed in Nuremberg, Copernicus remained in Fromborg, too old and weak to supervise it. The task fell to a theologian named Andreas Osiander. Osiander
fearful of the theological storm the book might cause, committed an act of intellectual betrayal. He anonymously added a preface to the book, stating that the heliocentric theory was not necessarily true, but merely a useful mathematical trick to calculate dates. He tried to soften the blow, to turn a roar into a whisper.
But Copernicus would never know of this betrayal in his lucid mind. In December 1542, just as the first pages were coming off the press hundreds of miles away, the old astronomer suffered a massive stroke and paralysis. He was plunged into a twilight state, half awake, half asleep, his great mind trapped in a failing body. He lay in his bed in the cathedral tower, drifting towards the end, while the race to finish his book accelerated.
It became a race against death. The printers worked furiously. Messengers rode hard across the German and Polish landscapes. The final pages were bound, the ink barely dry. The physical manifestation of a lifetime of fear and genius was making its way to the dying man. Would he live long enough to see it? Or would 30 years of silence end in incomplete darkness?
On May 24, 1543, the book finally arrived. Legend says that Copernicus was already in a coma, hovering at the very threshold of death. His friends and attendants gently placed the heavy volume into his hands. His fingers brushed the leather cover. His name, printed in bold ink, stared back at him. De revolutionibus orbium celestium, on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres.
Did he understand what he was holding? Did he realize that he was holding the device that would dismantle the medieval world? We like to believe he had a moment of clarity, a final spark of consciousness where the fear evaporated, replaced by the heavy, tangible reality of his achievement. He had held his tongue for a lifetime, but now the book would speak for him forever.
Hours later, Nicolaus Copernicus breathed his last. He died quietly, likely unaware of Osiander's unauthorized preface that tried to declaw his theory. He passed away thinking he had finally told the whole truth. He left behind no wife, no children, only this book, an orphan child of his mind that would have a troubled, difficult upbringing in a hostile world.
The revolution did not happen overnight. There were no riots, no immediate burnings at the stake. For decades, the book sat on dusty shelves, read only by the most skilled mathematicians. It was too difficult, too technical, and Osiander's preface had successfully fooled many into thinking it was just a hypothesis. But ideas are dangerous things. You cannot unthink a truth once it has been thought. Eventually, the fuse reached the powder keg. Decades later, free thinkers like Giordano Bruno would take Copernicus's ordered universe and expand it to an infinite one, paying for it with his life. The fear Copernicus felt was justified.
The Church eventually banned his book in 1616, realizing too late that it was the foundational text of a new reality.
It would take Galileo and his telescope to prove what Copernicus had only seen in his mind's eye. Whatever fear kept Copernicus silent, his math was sound. He had moved the earth, stopped the sun, and expanded the heavens. He shifted humanity from the center of the stage to the gallery, forcing us to grow up and accept our smallness in the vast dark.
Copernicus' story is not just about astronomy. It's about the psychological burden of truth. It's about the paralysis of perfectionism and the terror of standing alone against the world. He was not a fearless hero charging into battle. He was a hesitant, anxious man who was dragged toward immortality by the sheer weight of undeniable facts.
How many great ideas lie buried in graveyards today because their creators were too afraid to speak? How many masterpieces are locked in chests because of the fear of ridicule? Copernicus almost took the solar system to his grave. His life serves as a haunting reminder. Truth exists whether we speak it or not, but progress depends on the courage to publish.
In the end, the canon of Warmia gave us the greatest gift of all: perspective. He humbled us, but in doing so, he opened the door to the stars. He showed us that we are travelers on a spaceship spinning through the void, part of a harmony far greater than ourselves.
He waited until his dying breath to whisper the secret that broke the universe. But because he did, the universe has never been the same. Nicolaus Copernicus died so the modern world could be born.